Murders are common in the United States. That's a fact I don't think anyone would deny, and with common occurrences such as public shootings, I unfortunately do not believe it is something that will change until the country finds a steady way to combat said attacks, whatever that may be. Something else that's common in the United States is the romanticization of serial killers. A common sentiment being that we're more likely able to name a person who heinously ended the life of dozens of innocent people than we are to name the person who brought that person to justice. Although there's a lot of truth to that, whether it be the way the media reports on such affairs or the way we tend to glamorize and market said affairs for financial gain, there's an argument that understanding the way these serial killers work, understanding the way they think, what leads to their actions, can potentially lead to reducing said occurrences down the line. If nothing else, for some, maybe it's a visceral instinct. The curiosity and intrigue of how someone can do such acts as Jeffrey Dahmer. It's a guilty curiosity, but one we shouldn't necessarily be ashamed of, as turning a blind eye or not recognizing these figures is a surefire way of never one day preventing them. For today's movie review and discussion, Scott Moore and I, McConnaughay, will spend this edition of the Mishmash Podcast here on Mishmashers.com talking about the 2017 American biographical drama film called My Friend Dahmer, based on the 2012 graphic novel of the same name by cartoonist John Backderf, a person who knew Dahmer firsthand as a friend in high school before his killing spree began.
First one in this movie, I wasn't really sure what I could expect. So I got out, the meat, and I cooked it bloody, and I sat down and I started digging in, thinking that this is what the movie was going to be. Then I realized that this is before the time that Dahmer actually became who we know Dahmer to
It's
be.
kind of like a slice of life in who he was.
Right,
slice of life being
there was no long pig niblets eating in this movie. There was none of that aspect. So the Dahmer that we know is not the Dahmer that was presented here per se. I mean, you kind of see how he was illustrated to be moving towards that point, but he was never actually portrayed as the Dahmer that you see in like some of those more famous YouTube clips of him having the interviews back from like the 80s and things like that.
And I was thinking, one thing that I was worried about going into this film is I thought that they were going to make him a sympathetic character. And the thing is, it's not necessarily a bad thing for it to be a sympathetic character if that is the right story to tell. And I think that although this film does make him a sympathetic character, I don't think that's really arguable. I think that it works because of the fact that it's told from someone else's perspective, someone who actually knew him. So it has some kind of credibility to it.
Right. What I like about these kind of films and looking into the real aspects of serial killers and things like that is it shows you that they're normal people most of the time. So one of the things that is illustrious about our society is that we take in and we look at serial killers, and like you said, we remember who they are, remember their deeds, but we always seemingly forget who the victims are or who brought them to justice. But what these kind of films do is they remind us that serial killers are, for the most part, normal people. They live normal day-to-day lives. That little aspect of them murdering somebody or eating somebody or doing the hunting is a very small smidgen of their lives. Most of the time, they're doing the same things that you or I are. They're going out and they're going to work, they're waking up, they're having morning coffee, they're eating their eggs and bacon, and then they're doing this periodically and they're killing these people. But most of the time, these serial killers are quote unquote, I mean, they have some distinct thoughts that a normal person may not have, but they are quote unquote normalized individuals for the most part. And I think that's what this movie kind of shows us.
I think that it shows a different dynamic for Jeffrey Dahmer. As you said, it shows not necessarily that he's normal, but how strange he is in a different way than what we intended. It doesn't show him off as a sadistic, methodical kind of person. It shows him kind of as...
He's clumsy and goofy.
He's awkward. He's very, very awkward. Just everything about him. And I think there's a lot of depth to it as well.
What I want to know is, one of the things that I found weird that in the portrayal of Jeffrey Dahmer during this movie, he would be dancing in the middle of the hall, or they used him as a quote-unquote mascot for their like little gang and stuff like that. And Like, a lot of people seen him as this goofy kid who they're like, dude, he's just really strange. But I wonder if that was portrayed for the movie or if this was really who Jeffrey Dahmer
It's
was.
something that, and I did actually skim some of the book and what the guy actually said, and he said that he would fake seizures and things like that. And I think that he did it, or at least how I think it's supposed to be perceived that he did it in this film in particular, is he wanted to be seen. He wanted the attention, the eyes on him, and it kind of did it a lot. It was like it's because human characteristics were so awkward and foreign to him, but as it sees in this, a lot of the times he would just do a kind of noise and all that stuff, get a laugh, and then go on. And that gave him a little bit of attention.
So one of the things that I've realized going through psychology for so long, and a lot of the aspects that you're going to see throughout life are people like attention in a certain manner. And if they're not getting that attention at home, say in Jeffrey Dahmer's case, his parents were split. His father wasn't really ever there. His mom was kind of one of those overbearing, not really
Yeah, his
sure.
mother was overbearing, and it was like his father was the antithesis to that, where
Right.
he was very, very timid.
Right. So his father still demanded of him things that maybe Jeffrey didn't want to do. And so some of that attention, most of that attention was negative attention, but that's what he learned to garner. He learned to like that negative attention. So whenever he went to school, whenever he made friends and stuff like that, he wasn't able to portray himself as a quote unquote normalized individual who could have normal conversations because he was looking for the attention, but the only way that he knew to get attention was to do negative things. So he was doing those weird noises or throwing his hands up over his head and spinning around and things like that.
And I think that it actually makes me think of a line that was used in Jeff Lindsay's Darkly Dreaming Dexter, where he was talking about it, and he said one of the things that helps from, and in this case it's a fictionalized story, of course, it's Dexter, but he talks about how one of the best things about being a sociopath, or having a very, very loose way of looking at things, is you never stop to think, oh, this is embarrassing, oh, this is not something that people will think weird of me, and it allows you to move forward. I think that it seemed like he just didn't care. He wasn't very, very caught up with being embarrassed or anything else. He had no problem doing that stuff. He's just like, it gave him attention, and slowly it started to give him diminished returns.
Go more extreme. But the thing is that, like I was saying, is that psychology says that, whenever you're doing these actions, you're not embarrassed of them because you're getting exactly what you want. Even though you or I, or someone like that may feel that anxiety build if we're having to do that silly little action outside in the hallway or something like that, we'd probably have this building anxiety.
I have you know, I once, and only once, used a urinal with some person standing right on by the other urinal. But mind you, it was only because he entered while I was peeing. I would have left otherwise. But I also know a few things about that.
So most people, I mean, not all people, but a lot of people are socially timid and socially awkward in their own ways. We have our own social cues, we have our own social differences, and so yours is, I guess, peeing in urinals with somebody else. I don't.
A nightmare.
I could go in and pee, and I don't. Dahmer was one of those guys who definitely portrayed in this movie that he didn't care because he was getting exactly what he wanted. But he did go darker in the movie. One of the things that you always hear about serial killers is a lot of them is that they start small.
With abusing animals.
Right.
And
start small with abusing animals. And you see that in this. And he starts with the smaller animals at first. So you see that he is just going into that scientific view of it, where he wants to open up bodies mostly because he says that he likes the bones and he likes the insides of them. And that's what, whenever you look at his videos later on, I think that did stay true to what Dahmer would have said, because he did say that one of the reasons why he used to open up men was because he wanted to see what was going on the inside.
It was like a genuine curiosity. At one point, he even captures it pretty well whenever he's sitting in that, but he was with that black guy, and he's like, does your insides look the same as my insides?
Yeah, so he's definitely got some weird perturbed thoughts going on.
And I think that the portrayal, and I can't remember the actor's name in this movie, but I know that a lot of people were criticizing this person being casted. I think it's a Disney actor.
Yeah, I can't even remember who it is.
He came off really, really well as Jeffrey Dahmer, at least I think, especially with certain small details, like the way he walked. He walked, and it makes me feel bad because I kind of walk like that, but, or at least sometimes I feel like I used to. Like, he walks with, like, a lurch, and, like, he's very, very awkward with his movements.
He's a very awkward individual, and if you watch later on in his YouTube videos, they weren't YouTube videos, they were nationalized telecasts,
Yeah.
but now they're on YouTube, and that's where you're going to find them, is that he wasn't as awkward in his later life. He was very articulate. He was a very, very smart individual. And he was not one of those serial killers where he enjoyed what he was doing. Don't get me wrong, he liked it, but he was also highly aware that what he was doing was extremely wrong. And whenever he got caught, he even stated that he was glad that he had got caught because he knew that he would continue doing it forever. And he said that if anybody let him out, that if he ever got paroled or got let out, that he would continue to kill. That's just who he was, and that's what he wanted to do, and that's what excited him. But he was a very articulate man, and he was really well spoken, and that's one of the weirder things that you find with serial killers is that most of them are really articulate. Like, they're really smart individuals who, rather scary that at that IQ level you're going to find those individuals who want to dismember or want to eat or have that curiosity to do as such.
I think that it's also, in part, you have to have a certain level of intelligence, which it feels awful to say, but you have to be pretty intelligent to get away with as many murders as he had, because there's so many things you can keep in mind, like so many things even back then, although DNA evidence wasn't that popular, doesn't matter, but there's a lot of evidence you could leave behind, and obviously you have to have a certain amount of just gumption to be able to do something like that. I remember there was one thing where one of his victims escaped, and he went ahead and told the police officers that it was his lover, and then brought him back home. I don't know about you, but at no point if I see my victim escape, there's police officers involved, do I think, I'm gonna go get him. There's gotta be...
So it's bravery and also confidence in what you're doing.
Maybe you just feel free. I mean, or he does.
Like Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper was another, he was the co-ed killer from California. And he talked about one time where a victim actually had locked the car after he got out, and he had no weapons. His gun was under the seat of the driver's door, and he talked the victim into letting him back into the car before he killed her. And he said that there just becomes those points to where, that could have been it. That could have been the end of Ed Kemper, and that could have been the end of his killing spree already right there, but he was able to talk that girl into, hey, why don't you go ahead and let me back in? And she did. She let him back in. She unlocked the door and then allowed him to get his gun, and he murdered her that way. And that is really one of the most interesting aspects of serial killers, is that they do not understand social interaction. They do not understand human interaction, but they are so good at faking it that it seems so genuine that they are able to pick these people up and do with them pretty much as they please. And that's one of the major, huge aspects, and probably could be talked about in 90 of our videos because of the fact that there's just so many of them, and they are interesting, and a lot of
part of it is legitimately just having, and it helps with not having that timidness, is the only thing is to do it. If you actually can do it and play it completely straight, you'll find people are very, very, I wouldn't say gullible, because that seems like a harsh word, but susceptible to certain things, because what's going through their mind. People will overlook things if they are worried, if they're terrified, if they're in shock.
Plus, I don't think that anybody innately believes that someone else is going to kill them. And even if you're really, really scared, most of the time, like, okay, say walking down the street or something, you see another individual walking down the street, and maybe it's dark and they're hooded or whatever, and you're nervous, your first instinct is usually, are they going to rob me? Are they going to blah, blah, blah? But it's not, are they going to abduct me and then take me home and torture me and then mutilate my body and eat me? I mean, that's not where you go. I mean, that's not the first thought that you would actually have. So I think that we're susceptible to it because we are naive to the idea, because you just wouldn't believe that someone else was capable of doing as such. And that's, again, one of the major drawing points for people who are interested by serial killers is
it's so strange.
Right.
It's so
what mindset
odd. It's an anomaly.
You how do you get to that point to where you're okay with doing the things that you've done? So I think that we've strayed off a lot of what Dahmer was as the movie. What did you think of the overall movie? Would you recommend it to people? Would you give it a good thumbs up, or would you say that it's a passable?
I would say that if you go into this expecting a very in-depth perspective on Jeffrey Dahmer, then there's a chance you might walk away disappointed. Because it's mostly, for the most part, a slice of life. It is just a situation that I think it has a certain amount of depth to it. There's a lot of cliche elements to it, but at the same time, if that's the real story, then that's the real story. There's nothing you can do about it. It shows a serial killer in his upbringing who abuses animals, who's very socially awkward, quiet, and just very, very awkward and away from everyone else. Someone whose parents are arguing back and forth. Someone who's mistreated at school. Someone who's taken advantage of. And those are all very, very straight out of the Serial Killer 101 book. But at the same time, if that's the story that needs to be told, then that's the story that needs to be told. And from the perspective, there's no reason not to believe it. That this guy, John Backdorf, which is the most ridiculous last name, he should change it. But anyways, it feels more like a confession on his part, in a way. Because at the same time, he doesn't pretend that he's the good guy. He doesn't pretend the guy that since Jeffrey Dahmer was this bad person and did everything he could to stop it or anything like that. He actually makes it portrays it as though he is one of the causes to Jeffrey Dahmer. It was almost a confession of sorts, where it comes off as though like we kind of manipulated him. We made him like a sideshow freak. And so there's a certain depth to it that makes it worth watching, not necessarily because it's about Jeffrey Dahmer, but because it shows a good psychological analysis on that. So I would say I'd recommend it. It's perhaps not a great movie, but I think it has more to say than what one might expect just as a slice of life. And what do you think?
So I'm going to go on to the same aspect that it's a good look into a real life portrayal of Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't know that any of it's real. I don't know that any of it actually took place because, again, it's from of a person who was a quote-unquote friend with Jeffrey Dahmer. You got to take the social liberties and the creative liberties.
Yeah, a lot of assumptions, too, with certain parts.
And so, you have those opportune moments where Jeffrey Dahmer's alone and he is talking about this. Dahmer's not alive anymore to say, hey, this did happen or it didn't happen. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But if you take that grain of salt and you hold it and you think about the aspect of that life, then I would say that the movie is a middling movie. It's not a great movie. It's not a horrible movie. It wasn't the worst one I've ever saw. It's definitely not a horror movie. Don't go in thinking that it's a horror movie. It's definitely more of a psychological movie where they're looking into in depth of what has caused Dahmer to be who he is. I would say that if I was going to give it a rating, it would probably only get about a 5 out of 10, which is like right in the middle ground. It's not a great movie. It's not the most horrible movie I've ever seen. And in the back of my head the entire time I'm thinking, is this really the real portrayal of what Jeffrey Dahmer is? It hits in some of those because I've watched the interviews with Dahmer. Some of the parts it hits.
I think it exists as a good character study, not necessarily, even if it wasn't a interpretation of him, but it works in its own right.
I think that it probably is a movie that you can go watch, or you can leave it, and your life's not going to change either way. And that's my opinion on My Friend Dahmer.
With that being said, feel free to let us know in the comment section below what you thought about My Friend Dahmer, and feel free to check us out on mishmashers.com.
And don't eat anybody.